Okay, so this video is in response to some of the comments that are made in the comment section of several of my past videos. And I'm making this to sort of clarify some of the things that I've tried to explain that people are either not understanding or they've just subscribed to my channel and they haven't watched some of the past videos so that they can get a better idea of some of the things I'm trying to convey. So I'm just going to sort of go over a few things, and this may turn into a longer video because I want people to understand what it is that I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is how there are metaphors in the law. And what happens in these metaphors is that they change through time. So you can have a word used in the Constitution or in a legal writing that when they first used it was used in a certain way, and then over time the perception of what is and what is not, and the ideas and philosophies involving those things change, and then when you get 200 or 300 years later, you end up with something that doesn't look anything like what it was intended. And I believe this is one of the reasons why Thomas Jefferson said in around, I think it was 1783, in a letter to James Madison, that constitutions and laws and debt belong to one generation, the generation that created it. And after that, they should go away because every generation has the right to express their ideas in the way they intended them for their lives. And it should last for their life only and should not bind the next generation. Because the next generation are a whole new class of people who have completely different ideas and different situations. And when they hear a word, they will look at it differently. So when I write grammar books for my daughter, what I do is I go through all the old grammar books that I can find. The oldest ones I can find. Now, the oldest one I have is like 1793, something like that. All the way through the 1800s to the early 1900s. And I believe these grammar books are the best ones you can find on the internet. Okay? So these, one of these grammar books said basically what I'm telling you from a grammatical sense and not necessarily from a legal sense. And that's that, for example, the word stepmother. When people say a word like stepmother, back in the old days, it really was a neutral word. You know, it's my stepmom, whatever. And then as times changed, and stepmother became known as sort of more of an evil person, whether it be because of the story of Cinderella, which was around long before Disney made it into a cartoon, became known as sort of a bad person, an evil person. And it's because our perceptions changed. The word itself didn't change. Our perception of it changed, and so our use of it in a figurative sense changed. So back when the Constitution was written, For example, they used the word defense, but they spelled it with a C. Nowadays, and for a long time, they have started spelling it with an S. The word defense with a C means something completely different than defense with an S. But people are so locked into their ideas that they won't accept the fact that these are two different words originating from two different languages that have two different meanings. So just like stepmother 200 years ago probably had really a neutral connotation to it, nowadays, because people have been conditioned to believe that stepmother is an evil person, the word has taken on an entirely new meaning. So the way we look at words and our feeling about words and our intuition about words change throughout time. Okay, so they go from their true meaning, which is the authentic meaning of the word, to something that means something completely different and is totally artificial and fictional. Okay, so for example, let's go back to the word defense. When the founders used it, they meant to fortify. And we can see that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, where they talked about the seat of government and the places purchased to build fortifications. And they listed the types of fortifications, and then they included other needful buildings. Now, those needful buildings weren't just any building that they felt like they needed. It had to meet the definition of defense with a C, and that was to fortify. So these buildings were supposed to fortify. Nowadays we use defense with an S, which means to seek vengeance on. So the words have two different meanings, but how many people do you know that the word defense with a C is actually written in the Constitution and defense with an S is not? And how many people will tell you, well, that's because they misspelled it back when they wrote the Constitution? Now, as far as I can see, all of the misspellings in the Constitution, all of the errors have been corrected. They were corrected in the Constitution shortly after it had been written. So if defense with a C was intended to be defense with an S, they have never corrected that. So I take it to mean they meant defense with a C and that it was not a misspelling. And back in the old days, at the time they spelled those words, they weren't misspelled at the time. They were properly spelled at the time according to the spelling laws that they had at that time. Okay? So, fictions, the metaphors that we have now, because the Constitution was never rewritten to reflect the values and the intentions and the ideas of the people alive at the time, at this time. Therefore, we apply our current meanings and our current ideas to an old writing, which makes it a fiction. Okay, so our current ideas about what the old law says are fictional. So this sort of brings us into a matrix type situation, because we're taking new ideas and trying to force this old thing. And I'm not saying the Constitution's bad or that we should get rid of it. I'm not saying any of that. That's for another conversation, for another day. But what I'm saying is that we're trying to force this document to comply with the fictions of today, or the things we believe today, which would make it a fiction or a metaphor. It makes something real artificial. So one of the things that I see a lot, one of the misunderstandings I see a lot today is that people tend to misunderstand the separation between the types of people and who the federal government has authority over and who it does not. So you have governments, any government, which is, at least in a republic, public people in public offices doing public work, and they are public persons. All these public things, public office, public land, public person, public duties, they're all artificial, and they're for artificial persons. So they're people acting in a certain capacity. So where do they get all these public lands? They get them from the private people who either donate them or sell them or auction them. However they get them, they have to get them from the private people. So the public people in their public offices get their authority from the private people. They get their lands from the private people. They get their authority from the private people. It all has to come from the private people, because private people are the real people. They are the authentic people. The public people are the artificial people, and they are fictions, and they're acting as fictions. As fictions, they are regulated. So the laws that they write are supposed to be for them to follow in their fictional capacity. They're separate from private people, okay? So private people live on private lands. They have private issues. They have private things. They have private businesses, private corporations. They come under private law. They're also considered natural persons. According to Black's Law 9th, and I really don't want to get into whether Black's Law 9th is a real dictionary or not. According to Black's Law 9th, a private person, and this definition goes along with a lot of other definitions that I've seen in a variety of other dictionaries, okay? And it goes along with our system of government in the way it was intended to be ran. And that's that private and public are separated, just like church and state are separated. We don't bring religion into government. It doesn't belong there. Separation of church and state. You can be a religious person, but you can't dictate laws to other people in government that have to do with regulating their religion. Okay, so you have to keep your religion private. That's the separation of church and state. Church is a private matter. State is a public matter. Okay? So a private person is a person who does not hold public office or serve in the military. A private person can also be a corporation or private or partnership that's governed by private law. So there's a private law, there's a public law, and then there's a private law. All the public people on the public lands are supposed to abide by public law. Me, I'm a private person. If I want to go visit the public lands, I have to then abide by the public law, because the law is attached to the land. Okay? Just like when the federal people who are public come off the federal lands, they have to abide by our private law. Okay? So this brings up a whole issue about warrants, but I'm not sure I want to get into warrants for the purposes of this video. I do want to, however, say that if I'm a private person, which I am, and I go on federal property, for example, they have air shows, and sometimes on the 4th of July, they have big firework events, and they have other events where they let private people come onto the public land for various events. Sometimes you can go and just have a tour, or if you have a family member serving in the military, you have to have paperwork routed through, but you can have your family members come onto the public lands, the military post, and just walk around with them and show them things and show them what you do. But let's say I go to an event, and I go to an event on military property, and while I'm there, I set a house on fire, set one of the officers' houses on fire, and I say, oopsie, and then I run off the public lands thinking that I'm going to be safe because now I'm on private property. That's not how it works. They have a right to then come off and ask the private policing services or sheriff who helps the private people stay safe, to go and find me. They can ask him to go and find me. Now he is serving the private people. The sheriff can come with a proper warrant on private property, but the federal agent cannot. Okay? They have to ask the private people to come get me. The federal agent cannot come onto my private property and come get me, to come and stand trial for setting the general's house on fire, okay? And it's the same way if a military person comes off federal land and commits a crime on private property and thinks that he's going to be safe if he just runs back to the federal lands. He's not. He has to still be held accountable for any crime he committed. So, for example, there are many instances where military men come off the federal post and they get into some kind of trouble. They start a fight at a bar, they damage some civilian or private person's property, they commit sexual crimes against people, women or men, and so they have to be held accountable for those things. They can't just run back to the federal property and say, well, I'm safe over here, you can't come get me, na boo boo. They still have to be held accountable. Okay, and that is called comity or comity. Comity is the respect of the different law systems, which are called jurisdictions. So you have the federal jurisdiction, and then you have private jurisdiction, and they have to be able to work together sometimes so that they can serve justice when they need to. So if a federal agent has to come off the federal lands and go to the sheriff's department and say, we need this person because they committed a crime on the federal lands and we need them to come serve in court and to stand in court and be held accountable for their crime, then the sheriff would work with them on that and help find the person and turn the person over to the federal authorities. Okay? So, public and private are very different things. And there is no thing in the Constitution that allows the federal people to regulate private people. There's nothing there except for one thing only in the Constitution allows the federal government to regulate private people. And that's the militia, because the militia are comprised of private people. The militia is only governed by the people of the United States, the federal citizens, under one condition, and that's when they're called into actual service of the United States. And when they're called into service, they are called, at least in the old days, they were called privates, because they made up a class of people from the private lands under private law, called into service by the United States and regulated at that time when they're called into service, and they are called the militia, and they're made up of private citizens or private people, private persons, and they're called privates. Later on, they started changing what they were called based on their age group. So the younger ones would be called something, the ones a little bit older would be called something else, and the oldest ones would be called some other thing, but they were still classed as privates, comprising the militia. This is the only time the federal government has authority over private people. And the federal government did not actually draft them. The state did. The state would ask them to come and serve for a short period of time in order to fight a war, to acquire peace. Okay, that's the whole purpose. The whole true purpose for war is to defend yourself so that you can go back to a peaceful state, to end an enemy coming onto your land and trying to do bad things to you, so that you can get back to a peaceful state. It's the only reason for war. There's no reason to go overseas and fight people who have nothing to do with us. So there's nothing in the Constitution that allows the federal government any authority or power over private people unless they're in the militia and called into service. And the state calls them into service, and then the state puts them together and puts them under the federal government. Okay? So how did they come to have control over private people? This is something that's been done for probably over 160 years. Okay, at least. So there's a lot of things involved in this. And what I'm getting to is this middleman that was created. Let's make a long story short. So you had corporations coming to the United States and they wanted to take over the land. So they wanted eminent domain of the private property. They wanted to use the Constitution to do it. So what they did was they used the congressmen. They pretty much bought them off because these were these big corporations. They wanted to use the eminent domain clause in the Constitution to use it to take over private property. So what they had to do was they had to change people's ideas about what the Constitution meant, which is a metaphor. It's fictional. So they really changed the entire idea of what the Constitution stood for and what it was and what it meant and who it governed and who it didn't and what was supposed to be the goal of the Constitution. And then, they took over everything else. During the Civil War basically, in my opinion, and the opinion of some other writers, is that it really wasn't about ending slavery. It was about taking over private lands and bringing the states under the control of the federal government, whereas before the states were in control of the federal government. So like I said, the federal government did not draft military people into service. The states were supposed to do that. And then the states placed them under the control of the commander-in-chief as president so that he could accomplish some war efforts. Okay? So the states, or the federal government, really only had some limited control over the private people, only as a militia and only after being called into service by the states. So the states would call him into actual service, and then the commander-in-chief would then, once they were called into actual service, he could order them, you go here, I need 50 men there, I need 1,000 men there, I need, men here, I need this type of men here. And that's the ordering, okay? The commander-in-chief orders the military, orders the militia, which are the private people. So in order to get control of all the land, they had to first change idea about what the Constitution was, what it stood for, what it meant. And then they were able to take control of private people, their private property, their private lands. And now they want to just break up families and put children in homes of more liberal-minded people so that those children can be raised into a system that promotes really bad ideas. That was on Rebel Capitalist channel yesterday, and today's the 19th of January, 2022. And he was citing an article or some comments that some people made about California wanting to do that. And really, they have been doing that, because if you have a system of child protection in your state, what they're doing is they're using that system to go take kids out of people's homes that are like more conservative valued, and then put them into homes of liberals where they're basically abused and mistreated and given medication, because they want to raise them up into a system that continues this oligarchy, this totalitarian and authoritarian system, which is has nothing to do with the Constitution. So what we're going to do is now we're going to talk about this middleman that they created. They created this middleman so that they could act outside the Constitution and gain control of all the private property. This was really taken a hard left when Lincoln got into office. Okay, and I know people believe that Lincoln was this wonderful, delightful human being who wanted only to free the slaves and change, the outcome of life for the African Americans in America. And of course, slavery should never be a thing. It's an awful system. However, that wasn't Lincoln's purpose, and he said so many times in a variety of his writings. He even wanted to acquire some land outside of America and send all the black people and Indians there so that white people, these rich white people from Europe, could continue plundering the nation. So what he did was he appointed his military officers, who were the biggest asses he could find, and just let them run loose on the South. And they wiped out the South. They bombed it. They wiped it out. Okay. If you want to know more about that, read The Problem with Lincoln by Thomas Di Lorenzo. So Lincoln started this whole thing. The corporation started it before them. It was all about getting control of the land that belonged to the people, the private people. And now we have a system of middlemen where the federal government has used some small clause in the Constitution about making contracts and expanded it to meet their metaphor, to meet their fiction, to meet their artificial idea about what the Constitution means, so that they could create these instrumentalities. And what is an instrumentality? It's an instrument. What is an instrument? It's a tool. Okay, so they use these tools, which are their middlemen, to go and get control of the private people. And they do that through these various contracts. These contracts allow them to take control of private businesses, private corporations, private land, private homes, private families, your private body, and bring you in under the non-positive laws, and probably even the positive laws, even though all of these laws really only apply on federal lands, because that's the only place where the federal government actually has power. Now, the states agreed to some other things, like, letting the federal government represent them for treaties and such. But the majority of the Constitution is just about, really, it's how to elect people and who can be elected. And then where do they go after that? And what do they do? Okay. So these middlemen are things like the Federal Reserve Bank, the CDC, the FDA, the FBI, the CIA, all of these things outside the Constitution that they created to push their agenda. So all these contracts that you sign to pay taxes, to go into court, to get a driver's license, to get a license to work in some sort of thing, to get a license to purchase some types of things like chemicals and such, to go and vaccinate your kids. All these things are done by you or people people out there willingly. And when you do that, you give up your natural rights because you're doing it as a legal person. When you become a legal person, which is what you do when your parent signs the birth certificate, and then what you perpetuate every time you sign something, is this legal person brings you into this legal system. This legal name comes into this legal system, and then they have a right to regulate it. And when you're a legal person, you no longer have your natural rights. You're not acting as a natural person, you're acting as a legal person. So you don't have your natural rights. Okay? So when you contract with them, you're contracting with them as a legal person. When you start your business, you start it as a legal person. When you register your car, you're registering it with your legal person, as your legal person, under your legal name. You get a license under your legal name. Whatever kind of license, you're getting it under your legal name. Everyone has a natural person, and their natural person has a right to do all natural things, which is everything except harming another. But your natural person is regulated by these middlemen through contracts. People say that that taxes are a gift. Okay, I don't understand why people say that, because gifts are something that come from the heart. It's something that you do at your pleasure. It's not something that you're forced to doing because you signed a contract. So you don't sign a contract to gift someone money. Okay, you just give it. And a gift is not something that you have to then sign more forms to later to get some of it back. I'm not sure, someone posted some things on a comment section of my YouTube video, and they posted a few citations for some titles, and I looked at all of them, and I don't know what any of them are referring to. So I can't really comment on those comments and the sources of those comments, because they just lead me to basically nothing. But it was concerning taxes being a gift. You don't contract to gift people things. You contract to be obligated. No one is obligated to give a gift, because a gift comes from the heart, not because you're getting something back. So there are some times when a public person will meet with, let's say, an ambassador of another country, and that person will give a gift, like a gift of friendship, you know, to like a symbol of friendship. And so those gifts don't belong to that public person. They have to go to something somewhere and be set for all the people to see. So it actually belongs to private people, but not individually, just as a collection of things, right? So it's public, it becomes public property. So when people talk about gifts, I'm thinking they're confused between when an ambassador receives a gift from another country, when a person accepts these gifts, all the paperwork that has to go with it to document the gift. If a person receives a gift from another person who's like a private person gives a gift to a public person, the document that public person then has to do to show that it wasn't a bribe, it wasn't in favor of anything, and then they have to pay a tax on that because the gift is valued. So, like I said, we are not private people. We are not public people. We are private people, and they are public. They have to comply with all the laws. And so if they receive a gift, they have to claim that gift. The gift could be from a family member. So let's say there's someone in the military who receives a gift from a family member. They might have to do paperwork on that gift to show that they didn't get that in trade for something else. It was something they inherited from a family member, and it was a gift. Okay? So there's things about gifts that I think people don't understand, because they keep inserting themselves into the system. They keep wanting to be in that system. They keep thinking in their mind that they're part of that system, and everything that system does applies to them, and they're going to use this form or this form or this form or this other form to either get money or get relief or get some kind of return off of all the money they've been paying, or get something for free. And that's not how it works either. Now, private people can give gifts to the government, but they're not obligations. They're not by contract. You can't give a gift by contract. You can't be forced to give a gift. You can't be obligated to give a gift. And that's what these contracts do, because if they were gifts, then why, when I sign the paper, I can't go back and say, well, I don't want to give you this gift anymore. I've come to a certain situation where now I can't give you the gift. Then they come after you and they say, well, you promised you were going to give us a gift, so now we're going to take things from you. You're obligated. Gifts are not obligations. So a gift is, or when you sign the forms, you're signing it saying that you're going to be obligated to fulfill the contract. Now, contracts are supposed to go both ways, so we're supposed to get something. And what are we getting? I don't know. People say that that's, that they build the roads and stuff. Well, if they build the roads, then why is the state paying for it? Why do I pay state taxes to build roads and federal taxes to build roads? And why am I paying taxes to the state for, property taxes for the school when the schools are supposed to be ran by the parents anyway? I mean, is that a gift? And this question's been asked for a long time. Why are we forced to give money to a system that we don't want and don't like and is acting against our best interest? We should be able to step out of that. But because it's a contract and we sign a contract and they don't give a way out, a way to do a rescission of contract, how are we supposed to do it? And a lot of people have tried in many different ways to end the contract, and it's nearly impossible. So these middlemen are like the Federal Reserve Bank, and they're allowed to use federal contracts, federal forms to contract with people so that they're obligated to pay a tax that they're not actually obligated to pay. They're only obligated to pay it because they signed the form. If the federal government was given the authority to tax people, why do you have to sign a contract? Why do they make you sign a contract? Why do they need your signature? Why, if you don't sign something, you don't have to pay the tax? But if I open a business on private property, does that even exist anymore? Does private property even really exist anymore if we're all in commerce? So one day I was sitting at a restaurant in another town. It was another area. It's a beach city, a coastal city. And there are all these people riding around on golf carts. And the family went out to eat. My family went out to eat. And there were a couple of police officers sitting at a table near us. And they were talking. But then another person walked in. And he seemed to have been at least somewhat acquainted with these police officers. And he was sitting at a table near them, in between the police and my family, so I could hear everything that was going on, and I was intently listening. And the guy was asking these police officers, he says, why are all these people allowed to ride around in their golf carts? I thought that was illegal. And the policeman told him, you're only required to have a driver's license when you're driving on the highways. So if you've heard some of my other videos, you'll understand that words have a non-intuitive meaning. They mean certain things, an application to what it is concerning. So the law or the title that the word is used in has to do with that situation, that situ, that situs. So highways, the title highways, let's see, it's title 23, it shows it's been made positive. But when you look at the actual title and search for a positive law citation, there isn't one. There's a citation, but there's not a positive law citation. And it says, provided in part that this title may be cited as Title 23 U.S. Code, Section such and such. But that is not a positive law citation, which means this law actually has no positive law citation, which means it's not a law. And this is for highways. So what did this policeman mean when he says that the driver's license is only required on highways? Well, highways is part of the Commerce Clause. And the federal government claims to be able to regulate commerce according to the Constitution. And I disagree that the federal government was allowed to regulate commerce in the way that it does, in that it's bringing us all in under commerce and regulating all of us. Because if that were the case, why would we be required to register our businesses and get a driver's license and all these things? If we're all in commerce all the time, no matter where we're at, where we're going, or what we're doing, why do we need to get a driver's license? We wouldn't need that. They could just stop us anytime. Okay? Why would we need a permit? Okay, to show that our business was registered. Why would we need that? They could just walk into any business, if they had the authority to do that, walk into any business and regulate it, whether it was registered or not. Why do you need to display your permit or your license when you're doing business? That's so that they can see that you're registered when they walk in, and they can regulate you. Now, some people will say that is because when they stop you, they need to know who you are. Why do they need to know who I am? If I've broken a law and I've injured someone, they can just arrest me. And for someone to come bail me out or claim me as a family member, they would be able to say, oh, that's so-and-so. The fact is that they can't regulate everything, everyone, everywhere, all the time. Because many of us are private people, and so we're not in regulated commerce. We're not in federal commerce. Our private property has been brought in under commerce because we use the zip code. The zip code allows them to take a sip, meaning to take from us, to drink, to reach into currency, the current, the flow of money, and take a sip, to take some, to tax. They can't regulate private people. That's why they have to lie. And this goes back to what Lynette Zhang was telling you. If they tell you the truth, then you wouldn't become a part of it. So they have to lie to you to get you to comply. That's what laws do. That's how they get around doing the right thing. The moral thing is that they lie to you to make you comply. And this is just a money laundering system. It's revenue farming through lies and deceit and fraud of the private people, to bring them in under federal control, using the middlemen, the instrumentalities, to make you believe that they have control over you when they don't. Because they don't have control over private people, they have to use lies to get us to comply and to get us to go get a driver's license, get a birth certificate, to get the work licenses, the social security card, because all of this enlarges the size of them and enlarges your perception of their authority, enlarges your perception of their power. Okay? And if you walk outside and you go talk to the people down at the local store or coffee shop or wherever you go, and you talk to your family members or whoever, they're going to say, oh, the federal government, they're in charge, because they buy the lies. Okay? And the lies start when you're young and you're a child. This is something the Catholic Church has known for hundreds of years, that if you get a young child, and start teaching them the way you want them to go, by the time they're, an adult, they will never stray. They will stay with you. When I was 17, I had a neighbor, and she was an older woman. She had some younger children, and we became friends, and we were friends for a really long time. And she told me she was a diehard Catholic. She will never leave the Catholic Church, never. Even though she knows, in her mind, I'm just talking about her and what she said, she'll never leave the church. Even though she knows what they do is wrong, it's not right. She doesn't follow most of what the Catholic Church says, but every Sunday she goes to church and she prays, and she prays her rosary beads, and she makes and sells rosaries and all this stuff. And she says she'll never leave the church because she grew up in it. It's what she knows. It's where her comfort is, even though she doesn't like it. And there's a lot of things that people say through time about different institutions, and government is no different. We have grown up in this system. So we believe that the federal government has all power and all control over all of us, all the time, everywhere. And anything you do, you have to let the government know what you're doing. You have to let the feds know what you're doing. You have to let the state know what you're doing, so that they can come in and regulate you. But what they don't tell you is that it was your choice, because you can choose your form of government. So it was your choice to be regulated by the federal government. It was your choice to sign these forms to pay taxes to the instrumentalities. It's your choice to come under their laws. It's your choice to get a permit. It's your choice to be regulated in your private business, in your private capacity. And then they make it appear lucrative. Well, if you get all the permits and all the this and all the that, then when you go and you buy your products, you get a discount, and you don't have to pay the taxes because you're buying it from a store that's registered with the federal government. And being registered with the federal government, the benefit is that they can pass a discount to you because you're registered. And so it appears to be some sort of benefit to register, or a license. Well, if you don't have a license, the feds won't come after you. If you don't have a license, they can't come after you anyway. And the truth of the matter is if you have a license, they can come after you. If you have a driver's license, they can take you to jail. If you have a permit, they can inspect your job. They can inspect your business. If you have a church and you've registered it as a 501 whatever, they can come and regulate you. They can send FBIs to come sit in your church to make sure that you're not talking about political things, because when you registered it, you promised that you wouldn't. If you have a restaurant, and you promise in your paperwork when you registered that you wouldn't hold political activities in your restaurant, and then they find out that you are, you just told them through your registration that you're going to allow them to come and put you in jail or close your business down at their whim. So there was a story, and there's been many stories about people who have their businesses shut down during the sickness because they were the federal government and the states were fearful of a contamination and spread. So they wanted to shut businesses and restaurants and such down. But they can only do that because these businesses left the private, left outside of government, and registered to be a part of government, to be regulated by government. Okay, governments were instituted for very specific purposes, but they created these middlemen. Even the Department of State inside the state is another middleman to regulate you, to bring you in under them. So the private people have their own private businesses, and the federal government is supposed to regulate itself to promote certain things in the state. And the feds the same. The feds were supposed to regulate like the national military, the militia when called into service, to act as representatives in making peace treaties and these kinds of things. So they had their business and the private people had their business, and they were completely separate. And they're still supposed to be completely separate. But what the states and the feds did was they created this middleman to make your business their business, to regulate you, to keep regulating you. And they can only do that when you agree, and you have to agree individually, because governments can only regulate classes of persons. Okay, so the military is the class of person that the federal government was given the right to regulate. The militia, when called into service, was a class of private persons the federal government was given the authority to regulate for the benefit of all the states. Private people, when they register their business, you have to go through, and I forget what it's called. Register, you have to pick a number that goes with the type of work, the type of business that you're doing. And you have to register it, okay, under this number so that they can assign you into a class and make you a class of person. And once you do that, you leave your beautiful, wonderful, private sphere and go into the public, and you become regulated by government, whether federal or state. Okay, so the middlemen and the bank and the IRS and these kinds of things are the tool that governments have been using to bring in private people into the business of government so that they can regulate them. There's no law in all of history, in all of everything, in all of any representative type of government that gets control over private people in their private capacity doing their own private things. Now, if you're in a monarchy and the queen or king assumes to own everything and you're just there because they let you be there, that's different. But in America, the United States was created as an agency to promote our freedom, to protect our private capacity, to protect us in our private capacity. And they have completely failed at it. Completely, 100% failed. They don't protect us at all. You can write to your congressman, you can write to the president, you can write to the IRS, you can write to all these people and ask them, how do I return to being a private person? What's the form I use? What letter do I write? How do I do this? How do I leave the federal and go back to private? Silence. They won't tell you. They won't answer you because they need you. They need you as their power source. Without you, they can't live. Just like Lynette Zhang said, without the deception, there's nothing, because they have nothing. They have no authority. They have no power. Even the land that the federal banks sit on are not actually federal lands. according to the Constitution. Those are lands acquired outside the Constitution. So those buildings and those lands and those people, they have no authority. They claim that they can build federal lands or federal buildings off federal lands and put federal officers in there, but they still have no authority off federal lands. Okay, so I guess that's about it. I'm right at an hour, and I hope this made things a little bit more clear for some people out there who are still sort of learning and maybe haven't really gotten there yet. And I totally understand that when you're brought up thinking the world is a certain way, and then someone comes along and tells you that it's not, there's time, there's processes, there's thinking that has to be done, there's conflict in your mind. Well, if this, then why this? And if this, then why that? And if all these things, then why these other things? And it creates sort of a war in your mind because you're trying to reason it all out. And believe me, some people have said things to me that when I first heard them, I thought was complete nonsense. And then later on thinking about it, I'm like, there's could be some truth to that. That could actually be true. And maybe I need to think about this some more and look into it more. So I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad because they don't know things. And I'm not saying I'm 100% correct on everything, because this system is so confusing and convoluted and has been something that's been going on for so long. And so every administration, every group of congressmen, every person, every agent has their own idea. Every Supreme Court justice, every district judge, their decisions and their interpretations of law, they're all over the place. And so you get nonsense, just constant flow of nonsense out of the system. And it changes from 1 minute to the next, to the next, to the next. And there seems to be this idea out there that this system is going to fail. It's going to fall flat on its face. I say that it's going to be like going up a hill and then it's going to fall over a cliff. That's what I think. But that's just me. And some people say the exact opposite, that it's not going to go that way. I think it's interesting that Nancy Pelosi brought up the free market. And the free market is the private side of things. The free market is the private people doing their thing. Okay, so what we have right now is not a free market because they've brought us all in under the public system for whatever reason, just to steal money from us, steal property from us, bring us all into commerce so they can tax us and regulate us and charge us fees and all this kind of thing. But it's interesting that she brought up the free market and how politicians should be allowed to participate in the free market. And my answer to that is no, politicians should not be allowed to participate in the free market, either publicly, privately, or through any kind of agent. And that's the price you pay when you go into public office. If you don't want to do that, don't go into public office. If you go into public office thinking you're going to participate in the free market, that gives you incentive to put more controls on the free market, and then it's not a free market. And those controls allow you, the politician, to increase your wealth because you have some sort of insider information, because you know what laws you're going to pass, and you know who's going to get the contract before everybody else does. Like, so they have contracts to build things. Well, if you already know who's all the people who's put in a bid, and you already know who's going to be selected, then you have an incentive to go buy stock in that company. You have insider information. Well, we know the contractor Acme building supplies is going to supply the federal government with all of this equipment that we need that's into the billions of dollars, then you have an incentive to go buy stock when it's low, which increases the price, which then everybody else in the free market has to pay more for. So no, politicians don't get to be a part of the free market. Okay? They can, if they want to be a part of the free market, get out of politics, get out of public office, go back to private and play just like fair, just like everybody else. Okay? So I find it interesting that she had said that, which tells me that there's something going on where the politicians are a little worried that we are going to move into a free market. I believe that is because the truth is coming out, people are becoming aware, and the voting system has probably been gotten control of. Some group or whatever has gotten control, maybe through a computer system or what have you, the voting system. So it's not being not going through servers in Germany or Russia or China or wherever else, and then boosted to make another person president who didn't actually win the presidency by giving them more votes and letting them become president. Instead, I think they've gotten control of it, and so now you're going to see actual, real elections of the people that the private people are actually voting for. So I think that's going to change the game, and that's supposed to happen, I think, in the next election, hopefully. So be ready and understand that these are contracts. You don't have to sign anything. Nobody ever has to sign anything. You don't have to sign anything to live your life. You don't have to sign anything to open a business. You don't have to sign anything to drive your car down the road. You don't have to do any of that, okay? You only have to live and do right by other people, meaning do no harm. Okay, so that's my video for today. And if you have any questions, please post them in the comments section. I hope by now this information has come to be common for the majority of people. And I really would appreciate it if you would share my videos, like, subscribe. I'm trying to get 1,000 people, because I think at 1,000 you can be monetized, which means that I can put a link to my Teespring store up and sell t-shirts and such. So like, share, subscribe. If you have Facebook or what have you, Twitter, drop my channel link in there for people to see. And with that, I bid you goodbye, and I will see you in the next video.